Welcome to City Church's On Demand Messages. My name is Josh, and we're so glad that you're tuning in whenever and wherever you're tuning in from. In fact, it's possible that you either stumbled across us online or somebody shared this and you are leading in maybe for the first time. If you have any questions or want to know more about who we are, we'd love for you to visit our website. In fact, if you can even plan your first visit on our website. If you've got kids, we have a kids ministry specifically for them. You can plan your visit. You can go ahead and check them in, learn more about what that will be like. Maybe a middle or high school student, we've got you covered. And so if you have any questions or anything that we can do for you, please just check out our website. Today's message is going to be very special, and we're thankful that you're tuning in. It'll be anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes. And so if we can do anything for you, please let us know. But enjoy today's message.
We are in our second week of a series called The Table. Warren kicked it off and did such a good job last week and really just kind of leaned into this idea that our table is way too important for us to fill it with people who just look like us. So here's the thing. Every single one of us have a table. Every one of us. And if you're like, I actually don't have a table, so this message is for me, trick. No, we all have a table, because here's the thing. Some of us have an actual physical table that we sit at, that we share meals at, and all those other things. Others may not, but we all have a table of influence and a table of people that we do life with. And this table represents more than just a physical table, although the physical table is so important. And it's actually an incredible picture for where we're going, and I think what Jesus did for us. In fact, if you look throughout the Bible, what happened around the table was so incredibly important. But we all have a table, no matter if you're a middle school or high school or adult. We all have a table. We all have people that are in our lives. And what we talked about was our table is way too important for us to only have seats at the table for people who are like us. And so specifically last week, we said that your table should have a seat for someone who doesn't know Jesus. Because God's heart is that every man and every woman, no matter who they are, no matter what their background is or any of that they would come to know Jesus. And so for us, we need to create that space. So today we're going to pick up with that, and I'm going to pick up where Morgan and Warren left off with a little this or that. So continue to yell it out. We got you warmed up earlier, so now I expect you to yell it out, okay? So this or that. Here's the first one. Morning person or night owl? Okay. Night owl. Night owl. Night owl? My night owls? Oh, that's an eagle call. I don't know what, yeah. All right, anyway, sorry. All right, video games or board games? Woo, wow. Tozy, I love it. All right, next one. Bulldog or Yellow Jacket? All the Georgia Tech fans from yesterday are like, Yellow Jacket, I don't know if I can say that here. Yeah. And we just divided our church right there. All right, let's go home, guys. I don't know. Yeah, all right, last one, most important. Pizza or wings? Yeah. Ooh, okay. I love it. So here's a little something about why we're doing this. Is because this is actually the main function of how our brain works. Your brain has something called the limbic system. We're not going to go through all these things. What you need to know is this, is that this part of your brain is a decision-making part of your brain. And here's the thing about this part of your brain. It's lazy. This part of my brain is lazy. And so it tries to work as fast as it can. So what it does is it takes decisions like this or that, and it begins to say, it's much easier than just to create a characteristic of someone with this, and more so, let's just create a category and let's stick them into it. Because it's just way simpler to do that. When it comes to quick decisions, the limbic system is incredibly helpful. When it comes to people, the limbic system can be incredibly hurtful. You see, because what it does is it tries to make the most it can with the least amount of effort. So it categorizes things and it defaults to dualism. So it moves from this or that to ascribing value and categories to different things. And so if we just continue to go down this line, rich and poor, black and white, Democrat, Republican, single, married, essentially what your brain does is it begins to try to simplify things by saying all of these things, and then it eventually ends up with in or out, or us or them. And it draws these lines. It's great at doing this. It's your brain's default. It's our brain's default. And what happens is the lines that we begin to draw become more than just lines. And what we begin to do is we begin to build a fence. with that line. And so we take the pride that we may have of not wanting to be wrong and not wanting to think that our way might not be the best way. We take the pain and the hurt, maybe from what someone has done to us, and so we've categorized them in a place where we say, well, that's them and this is us, and you're either with us or against us. Maybe we take the comfort. Let's just sit here for a second. The comfort, because it's just much easier to surround yourself at your table with people who think like you, act like you, are the same stage of life as you. Way more comfortable, right? So we take the comfort, we begin to build a fence, and then for some of us, or many of us, we take the bias, whatever that may be, a bias personally, a bias, there we go, a bias politically, a bias racially, a bias in age, maybe gender, maybe sin, maybe a bias towards whatever that may be. And what we do is our brain doesn't just draw lines. And this one's a little hard to get in sometimes, right? Because this one can be difficult. I'm just going to play off that. But our brain doesn't just draw lines, it builds fences. And so it becomes what I perceive as right and what I like and what I prefer in them. Us and them. This is what our lives and our brains actually do. And if we were honest today, and hopefully we are, always, many of us are living our lives like this. And someone on the other side of this is someone who has hurt us, or someone we believe isn't as educated as us because of the decisions they make. And what we do is we take characteristics of people and we've created categories, and now we've drawn lines and built fences. This is where any kind of hate comes from, any kind of prejudice comes from, any kind of bias comes from. It's because at some point we made a decision to not just see something in a choice someone made or something in someone. We decided to categorize them holistically and created an entire narrative around it. And we say it's better on my side of the fence than to step over into your side of the fence. Now, before you start typing up emails to me about do not conform to the patterns of this world, how dare you? This isn't a message on conformity. This isn't a message on parenting. This is a message on personal evangelism. This is a message on your table and the people you invite into your life. Because I think that you can sit shoulder to shoulder with someone and not see eye to eye. And the question we have to wrestle with is this. If we don't want to do the slow thinking to get to know a person and we'd rather put them in a category, here's what we've got to ask. Does God's heart align with where you have drawn your lines? With whatever line you've drawn in the sand of it's us versus them, and I'm not going to say you did it intentionally. I'm not going to say that but some of us did, okay? Some of us did because it was just more comfortable and more easy to draw that line and build that fence. But some of us haven't. And maybe it's something that we've grown up with. Maybe it's something that we've heard before. Maybe it's just something that our lazy brain just did and we've decided to live in that way. But the question is, does God's heart align with where you have drawn your lines? So this morning, we're going to talk about and look at a story in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 10. And here's a little setup to this story. So Acts chapter 10, what's happened in the book of Acts is Jesus has previously, before the book of Acts, Jesus has come, he gave his life, he rescued the world, he died on the cross, he resurrected again, and then he spent some time on earth, and then he ascended into heaven, and he said, as I leave, I'm going to give you something better. I'm going to give you my spirit. I'm going to give you my presence inside of you. It's God with us. And so he does this, and then his church just starts. So one day, 3,000 people are added to his church. This movement begins. And so as this movement is going, the thing that we have to know at this point in the stage of this movement, of this church, it's predominantly Jewish. Okay, so it's predominantly Jewish. Jesus was a Jew, and so it happened in Jerusalem. And so, the mindset is, the fence is that Jewish people can be saved. Okay, so in this story, we have two characters, Cornelius and Peter. So here's what we know about Cornelius. He was Roman, and Peter was Jewish. So ethnicity-wise, different. occupation. Cornelius was a commander. Peter was by trade a fisherman. As we continue to go on, we know that because he's a commander, then he was actually educated. So commanders in the army at this point, they were commanders, became commanders, not because of their fierceness, but because of their intellect. And so they knew how to lead people, they knew how to strategize and all that. So we know he was educated. We know that Peter was uneducated. Like it literally says unschooled fisherman, okay? So we know he was not educated, okay? And because of all of these things, at this point in time, Cornelius was considered religiously out, and Peter was considered in. Or Peter was us, and Cornelius is them. And so as we pick up in this story, what we see is we have this interaction that is coming between these two individuals. So what I wanted to do was, because chapter 10 is a pretty long chapter, and we're going to kind of jump into the end of it, but I wanted you at least to see how this thing began, a quick snapshot of that. So check this out.
In the port city of Caesarea, there was a Roman centurion named Cornelius, and he represents everything the Jewish people would hate about the Roman occupation.
An angel appears to him, and he tells him to call for a man named Peter. So Peter comes, and he finds Cornelius and his friends and his family all gathered together in his home.
Yeah, and this is scandalous. Jewish people don't enter a non-Jewish home to avoid ritual impurity.
So what's Peter going to do?
Well, right before this, Peter had a vision. God brought to him a collection of animals that his people were forbidden to eat, and then God said to Peter, "Eat these."
And this is shocking to Peter. He says, "I've never eaten anything impure."
And God responds, "Don't call impure what I have made pure." And then that's it. The vision was over.
So Peter's going to start a new diet?
No, he's an Israelite, and he's honored these customary food laws his entire life. The vision was preparing him for this moment.
So two individuals, Cornelius and Peter, two completely different people, opposite ends of the spectrum, both have a vision from God. Cornelius, at this point, was not a follower of Jesus. Peter was. Both have a vision. And so Cornelius actually calls for Peter, and Peter comes to him. But before Peter came to him, we saw that Peter had this vision. Now, what's interesting is this. Cornelius is smart, right? And so if I'm Cornelius and God comes to me in a vision, I'm going to think, God, it just seems more efficient if you would just tell me what you want to tell me instead of me having to go after Peter. But it's interesting that at times, and I've learned this in my own life, that God usually uses someone else that usually is much different than I am to speak in, to encourage me. And so here's what happens. We saw Peter's vision, but just to double down on a little bit more. So he has this vision in verse 11 of chapter 10. He says, "I saw heavens open and a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals, reptiles, birds of the air, and there was a voice that said, 'Rise, Peter, kill and eat.'" So this vision has two things. Animals, reptiles, and birds, and then rise, Peter, kill and eat. Some real man versus wild stuff, okay? So this is God's heart. And so here's the thing about this, two things. First thing is this, all of these animals were considered Peter's ceremonial unclean, so could not eat them, right? And so God says, I'm showing you this. He's also hungry, like I was told he's actually hungry. And then he says, hey, rise, kill, and eat. And so there is this urgency. So there's these ceremonial unclean things, and now God has just said, Peter, get up now, kill, and eat. The whole overarching idea behind this vision, although Peter doesn't know what it's about yet, is this. Peter, something has to change now. And so Peter doesn't know what that is, but he does know as rise, get up and eat. So be aggressive and go after this now. And he knows that this is not comfortable. This is a foreign idea to him whatsoever. But he knows this. There's an urgency to this. So verse 14, Peter said, "By no means, Lord, I've never eaten anything common or unclean." 15, and the voice came to him a second time and said, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times. Again, Peter, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. I'm like, man, just come on, man. It doesn't take 3 times every time, but I guess it does with Peter. So this happened 3 times, and then everything was taken up at once. So here's the thing about this. God isn't trying to change Peter's diet. He's trying to change his heart. And so at this time, it was hard for Jewish people to believe that the church would be open to anybody, that Jesus' table would be open to anyone other than just Jewish people. So we know that Peter is wrestling with this vision because verse 19, it says, and while Peter was pondering the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, these men, 3 men are looking for you from Cornelius. Rise and go down and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them. So I love this, that God doesn't explain the vision to Peter just yet, but he does ask him to take a step of obedience. I think many times at our table, we don't know how things will unfold if we sit with someone who is not like us, but sometimes God's just saying, just sit down. And so he says, okay, Peter, I want you to go down right now. This is urgent. Verse 23, he invited them in to be his guests. The next day he rose and went away with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. So Peter responded, and he was obedient. And then when he gets to Cornelius' house, he still doesn't know what's going on. So here's what he says. He says, verse 28, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. I ask you, why did you send for me? So Peter doesn't even know still at this point, like, hey, why am I here? Like, that's the way to enter a party. I don't want to be here. I'm not supposed to be here, but why am I here right now, right? And so this is what he does, and Cornelius responds and says, well, you tell me. God told me to send for you. You're supposed to have a vision. And in that moment, God showed Peter why he was here. And this is the most important part, verse 34. So Peter opened his mouth and said, truly, I understand that God shows no partiality. But in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. So God pulls 2 completely different people into the same room, and they don't know why until that moment. And Peter says, I get it now. God is dealing with 2 totally ethnically, socioeconomically, and academically different people. And God chooses 2 men that could not be more different, and they both need to hear the same message. That all people, regardless of race, culture, education, socioeconomics, sin, political persuasion, etc., all people are made in the image of God. And therefore, all people are welcome at Jesus' table. And so, and I love, this isn't talking about conform, this is talking about evangelism. Actually seeing all people, everyone, and saying all of them are made in the image of God. I mean, very first chapter of the Bible, this whole thing starts, and God makes it abundantly clear. Genesis 1:26, he says, let us make man in our image after our likeness, which means that everyone is made in the image of God. And the scary thing, and the thing to be aware of is this. If a message could get lost from Genesis to Peter, if Peter could forget this part, if Peter could miss this, then the same message can get lost from Peter to now. If we aren't careful, we can make this story about Cornelius, that Cornelius needed Jesus. And that's true. He did need Jesus. He did need to be saved. He did need to be rescued. But Peter needed the message just as much. You see, Cornelius needed a first conversion of being saved. Peter needed a second conversion. He was already saved. He already had a relationship with God. He just needed to be reminded and understand that everyone is invited to Jesus' table. It turns out that the message that Peter received for Cornelius was the message he needed to hear for himself. All are invited. There's room for everyone at this table. Not everyone at the table is going to be someone like you. And I'll just tell you right now, like this passage could not speak more to one of our values, to be for all people, that everyone is invited to the table. It doesn't mean that we agree with everything, and Peter's even clear. He's like, God's table is open for everyone, and anyone who fears him, anyone who receives him, anyone who is transformed by him, anyone who understands that sin has kept me from God, but I want a way to Jesus, and Jesus made the way for that. Anyone who believes that is actually not even just welcome at the table, but will be saved. And he's clear on that. And so for us, like, you just have to understand that your table shouldn't look like you. And let's pause here for a second. We have a value this to be for all people. And if you're living for a church where everyone's going to be like you, this isn't your church. Okay? Just straight up, this isn't your church, okay? Well, actually, It's not our church anyways. It's Jesus' church, just to clarify before I get an email about that, okay? So, I don't mean that in an aggressive way, but I do mean this, that if you're not okay with sitting at the table with people who don't look like you, honestly don't believe what you believe at times, probably don't vote the way you vote, probably have a different story, probably some are going to be a lot older and some will be a lot younger. If you're not okay with sitting at a table and leaning in, then it's going to be really hard to, I think, get plugged in at this church, because we just believe that everyone is made in the image of God, and so that everyone has a seat at the table. What they choose to do with that seat is up to them, but we better make sure that there's a seat for everyone at the table. And so I invite you into that, the same thing that Peter had to learn. It's not just the story of Cornelius. Many of us, the story of Peter needs to be our story. And so here's what this actually looks like. You see, for many of us, we spend a lot of our time building fences because it's just comfortable. It's just easier this way. In our community group this past week, we were acknowledging, like, it's just easier to fill our table with people who look like us or going through what we're going through. Like, it's just easier that way, right? Because no one's going to push you. No one's going to challenge you. And so for many of us, we spend this time building these fences. And for some, the people on the other side of the fence are people that just don't look like us, or they don't believe what we believe, or whatever else. They make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily make. Others of us, people on this side of the fence, are people that have hurt you, and you've put up a wall. And I'm not saying that it's a break down the wall and just let them back in, but you have put up a dividing wall because of that pain. And there's no way we're ever talking again. There's no way we're ever going to work through anything again. Some, whether you grew up in it or you experienced it or whatever, but you have made biases towards people of other races because of maybe what you've seen or what you've heard, and so you put up a fence. And it's not a physical fence, but you know that when you see someone that doesn't look like you, you automatically make assumptions. And so you built up a fence. And what that fence is doing, I believe with all my heart, what this fence does is it doesn't protect you from the world. It actually keeps you from experiencing all God has for you. Whether it's reconciliation from pain, or whether it's reconciliation racially, to see everyone is made in the image of God, no matter the color of their skin, or whether it's to let down pride and actually be okay with maybe being wrong, or maybe growing, maybe someone speaking into your life. It's just easier if I'm going the direction I want to go and everyone's telling me, keep going that way. And God forbid someone in your life sits down and says, hey, I'm concerned. I'm worried. I'm not sure why you're making the decisions you're making right now. Our flesh doesn't want to hear that. But as we build up walls, it keeps us from the very thing God has for us. And so there's another option. Instead of building taller fences, you take the pride, and maybe you take the pain, and you take the comfort that's just easier to do this way. And maybe you take the bias that does not want to get out. And you take those same things, and instead of building a taller fence, you build a bigger table. And the beauty of this bigger table is as you build a bigger table, it automatically creates space for more people. And as you build a bigger table, you create more chairs and more seats. And maybe for you, what you bring to the table is actually your pain. And the person that sits across from you is a person that maybe hurt you. Or maybe you hurt them and you just don't want to admit that you were wrong. And you don't hide it, you just bring that pain. And instead of putting down a piece of the table and attacking them, you just simply sit and listen and ask questions. And maybe for you, your table looks exactly like you in every age, race, stage of life, all of that. And you begin to look around and you say, God, would you put people in my life that I can invite to that table that can maybe challenge me? And so maybe at your table you sit down with someone who's 20, 30 years older than you, and you realize they're made in God's image, and us being real, they got way more wisdom than you have, than I have. And you sit down and you ask questions and you listen. Maybe it's someone who doesn't look like you with different color skin, and you invite them to your table, not to be a gimmick, but to genuinely say, I want to grow and understand who God is. And I think we understand way more when our table doesn't look like us than it does when it looks like us. And we sit and we ask questions. This is not comfortable, but I believe that we are better when the table is bigger. And this is something that we have to fight for, that we constantly have to challenge ourselves in. Right when God put it on our hearts to plant this church, I said, man, we want to be a church that's for all people. We want to be a church that reaches people who are far from God. And I began to look around my table, and my table looked like me, thought like me, were the same age as I was. And most of those people are still at my table because they're my friends and I love them. But God was very clear that, hey, the table's got to get bigger. And for many of us, your table's got to get bigger. So can I ask you, in your life right now, if you were being brutally honest, let's just sit at the table together. Is your table getting bigger or smaller? Is your table getting bigger or smaller? And if it's getting smaller, I would ask that you would stop building the fence and start building a bigger table. So this morning, here's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves realizing that the first thing is, Christians, if you're a follower of Jesus in this room, we're the worst at this. We're the worst at building small tables. We're the worst at welcoming other people in. So we have to first identify and acknowledge that. Like, we're just not good at it. If you're here for the first time, or you're like, you don't have anything to do with God, and you're like, yeah, I don't want anything to do with this, it's probably why, because we haven't done a very good job of this. But I do love the stories that are coming out of our church. I was talking to someone the other day, and he said he's in a city group. So city groups meet throughout the week, and he was talking. He said, the first time I went to my city group, I looked around the table, and I was like, man, these people are totally different than I am. Age, everything. And he said, I had this moment where I thought, this is my last time coming to this table. And he said, I left that time. It was not that I had a bad time. He was just like, man, these people aren't like me. He said, I left that moment. I was like, I'm probably not going to go back there. He said, and then I realized that if I'm not going to go back there, then I'm just being the same hypocrite that I hate, the person that's not willing to lean in. He said, so I kept coming back, and I kept coming back. And he told me the other day, he said, I'm learning more about God from these guys around the table, from these families around the table, than I ever have anywhere else. And I love that. I love that. I love that. I had a meeting this past week with someone that we didn't see eye to eye on some things. And so we sat at a table for 2 hours and just talked about it. Was it comfortable? Not at all. But we sat at a table, we made it bigger, and we began to work through it and reconciled. The thing is that Christians, if we don't lead in this, we can't expect anybody else to. And so it's on us. So here's what I'm asking. Whatever it is that's keeping you from building a bigger table and it's building a bigger fence, would you do something called repenting, which means completely turning back and turning away from whatever that is in our life, whatever that sin is in our life, to turn away from it. So here.